Hey guys, are people from both teams here?
Couple of my team members are yet to come. They're
Yeah,
receiving
sure,
link.
cool. Yeah.
Monash is here as well.
Uh, can you guys just tell me which motion you've chosen for this round?
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden? Oh, brilliant. Cool. Guys, shall we start?
Wait a couple of minutes, please.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Guys, in the meantime, if you guys can put your preferred pronouns in the chat box, that would be really helpful. From both teams, affirmative and negative.
think all members from BUET have come, so we can start if you want.
Okay, cool. Give me a minute, let's start.
Okay, can I be heard? Am I good to start?
Just a minute, okay? Just
Okay, no
one
worries.
second.
All good.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're all good to start. Without any further ado, I welcome all debaters to the round one of Monash Australs 2020. We will be debating the motion this House as Joe Biden would choose to run on a Medicare-for-All platform. I welcome the first speaker on Team Affirmative to give a speech. Here.
The United States of America has been ravaged by the COVID crisis in a way that has destroyed institutions and exposed the systematic failings of the American healthcare system. The healthcare system, under the status quo, that locks out millions from ever accessing the medical care that they require. It imposes exorbitant fees on the poor and the disenfranchised who do not turn out to vote under the status quo, those who pay thousands and thousands for the very basic treatments when they can even afford that. Fixing this system is the only way for Joe Biden to win this upcoming election, and we think it's essential to getting the best outcome in this debate. So I'm going to set up a little bit of context. I'm going to tell you then why this significantly boosts Joe Biden's electability and why and how it reunites the Democratic Party's platform. So firstly, what does Medicare for All actually look like in this debate? We think very basically and barely like it includes generous healthcare benefits and protections for all Americans. We think that's a taxpayer-funded system that has lifetime enrollment. We think a Medicare for All system is better than any status quo in which like private insurance companies are unfettered in their ability to charge high and increasingly high premiums, where prescription drug costs are continuing to surge for literal life-saving medication. The Medicare for All is always the better alternative in this debate. Secondly, then, what does Joe Biden, as the actor we care about, want in this debate? We think first and foremost, we think he wants to be elected president, so winning this November's election, particularly in wake of the damage wrought by the Trump administration and the damage that they could wreak if they got a second term. We think secondly, Joe Biden wants to reaffirm faith in American democracy. So we think like the Democratic Party in particular has like a negative momentum going against them, in that Obama's primary policy of Obamacare practically helped very few people, and that Hillary Clinton's election flame out disillusioned a lot of like liberals or progressives or left-leaning people. We think Joe Biden actively wants to mobilize the progressive movement and the left-wing movement to not only help him in this election, but this election and elections beyond that. I think thirdly and finally, Joe Biden wants good healthcare outcomes for the American people. Insofar as he's running for president, he cares about the citizens in which he represents or seeks to represent at the election. So let's speak about our substantive. First of all, how Medicare for All significantly boosts Biden's electability, and secondly, how he reignite the Democratic Party. Speaker, currently there are huge amounts of disenfranchised voters across the United States, and that can range from people of color like African Americans who have never truly felt represented by the elitist institutions that run government, or whether that is just like people that are really, really poor in rural parts of the United States who feel absolutely left behind by both parties. These might have been people that turned to Donald Trump because they thought there was a chance to be represented by somebody and only found that he gave tax breaks to big businesses. We think these include people that were Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren supporters, or left-wing people who just never engaged with the Democratic primaries to begin with because they never felt like the progressive policies had a chance of getting up. These are a significant swath of voters that could turn the US election, and only we capture them on our side of the house with Medicare for All for two key reasons. Number one, we think capturing disenfranchised people is inherently easier when you propose Medicare for All, because these are the very people that are systematically locked out of accessing healthcare. We think that systematically affects you all through your life. As you're a child, you are unable to get treated for medical ailments, up until an adult in the age of COVID-19, knowing that if you get coronavirus, you're going to be on the hook for thousands of dollars to pay for your medical treatment. I think all these people have strong incentives to get behind a Medicare for All platform. We think secondly, importantly, this model particularly affects African Americans equally in a really significant way. Because I think that comes in contrast to all other Democratic Party policy beforehand, where even insofar it benefits marginalized communities, it would do so on an unequal basis, where you would be more likely to help rich African Americans or employed African Americans as opposed to the entire spectrum equally. We think what we get in this debate that you only get by backing a Medicare-for-All platform is a policy that, number one, is very practically helpful and just likely to appeal to these people on a very instinctive basis. But number two, a policy that is symbolically really inclusive. We think that is significant for making people feel included in the Democratic Party movement, for making people actually get out in November to vote for Joe Biden. We think we capture these people in a way that they wouldn't vote for Joe Biden under the status quo or in the opposition's world for a number of reasons. Because number one, as it exists, the Democratic Party and Biden is seen as part of an elitist institution insofar as this would be the party of big business that is in bed with these high premium insurers. We think we overcome that narrative and we help strike a massive blow to that by putting Joe Biden on the side of the American people, by making him advocate for a policy that practically helps them. Number two, we think a significant amount of these voters that we talk about are disillusioned, right? Whether it's because the Democratic Party has strayed away from their principles, or whether they backed a candidate that was a progressive like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and they saw resistance in the Democratic primaries. This is a way to win them back. We think thirdly, people that currently don't vote for Joe Biden because they don't feel like his policies currently address their needs. We change that because we think there are plenty of people who are affected by unequal access to healthcare, who cannot afford access to healthcare. We think that number is increasingly surging in the age of COVID, where more and more Americans are getting infected and requiring hospital treatment. The outcome that only we're on our side of the house is all these people who wouldn't vote for Joe Biden now do on our side of the house. The outcome then is that we get these huge amount of swing voters to side with us. And to the extent that Donald Trump's victory against Hillary Clinton was rather narrow, we think this is literally an election winning issue. So we think by virtue of that, we win this debate from the outset. The opposition has to show us why this policy would make people less likely vote for Joe Biden, or how they could propose any other way for him to win the election. We think we give you that clear path to victory that they do not. But secondly, beyond the many voters we've already captured, we think there is another significant class that Biden gets only for Medicare-for-All, and that is that middle class, moderate group of voters. We think this is also quite an important stakeholder because these the swing voters that you could damage Donald Trump's voter base for by attracting them to yours. So to win the election, it's important to get this group. Speaker, this is a group that is increasingly worried about healthcare, and they're increasingly, more than ever, worried about healthcare in the age of COVID for a number of reasons. Because firstly and practically, they just feel more at risk of having to go to hospital or suffering medical illness because COVID is so rampant. Number two, this is a group that feels a pinch of insurance premiums getting higher and higher, and those premiums are increasing because the risk of having to pay them out in COVID is higher, so it's going to continue to surge. Number three, this is a group that suddenly feels more precarious in their financial situation, because previously you might have felt really comfortable with your financial status, but now your job is at risk, or your insurance premiums are higher. So this group is more concerned about that status. Number four, we think they are broadly more health conscious and health aware as a result of COVID, because you're now far more likely to know someone that's had the illness, or unfortunately someone that might have died from the illness. And number five, we think these people are fully aware that COVID has destroyed the United States economy. And for that economy to reform, we think it starts with safer and better access to healthcare, so your workforce can actually go back and work without fear of getting sick and losing everything. We think these voters are more likely to get around Medicare-for-All. It is most important to win these voters in particular that we prioritize Medicare-for-All over anything else like economic reconstruction. Because I think it's on a fundamental level, people understand that to repair and reform your healthcare system is an essential precursor to actually starting the economic reconstruction to begin with. Insofar as Joe Biden could or should prioritize economic reconstruction ahead in Medicare-for-All, that would never have any chance of succeeding, because we think you'd be fundamentally undercut by the inability for your workforce to stay healthy and get good and equal access to that treatment. So we think that voters would easily mobilize around the idea of Medicare-for-All at the expense of anything else. We think secondly, the economic recovery is far less tangible to these voters that we care about in this debate versus healthcare, because it's far harder to envision a politician leading you to economic welfare, leading you to economic health out of the COVID crisis than it is a politician who's able to make sure you don't have a 5,000 bill when you go to the hospital next week. We think they're far more likely to support Medicare-for-All. So because we win over two really important parts of this debate, we think we win Joe Biden the election. We think we reignite the Democratic Party. And for those reasons, we were so proud to propose this motion.
I thank the speaker for that speech. Next up, I invite the first speaker on Team Negative. Here.
Hello.
Uh, Before that, guys, just keep your eye on the chat box. So I'll just keep putting the timestamps whenever it's required. Cool.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Understood, Honorable Speaker, in these American circumstances, we think that Joe Biden needs to be centrist, not having any socialist activities, because that's Donald Trump being a polarized right-wing representative. Joe Biden needs to have the concentration of the left-wing parties or the most swing voters, because of the American values that have been being continued by ages, and not having the intuitive or some not practical by not taking not practical stuff. Why there are premises like or context about that the COVID system will be actually in a control by having this Medicare system. Why it doesn't happen? Understand that this kind of Medicare system needs a lot of money that has been sponsored by the payroll taxes. But in this COVID-19, we know that the revenue is not actually going down, but by this having burden of this Medicare, the Medicare, the economy welfare is not going to happen. That is going to become the graph of economy is going down, and this kind of huge burden of this Medicare is being doing actually making this revenue or making this economy in a making this whole Medicare system is a short term, and we understand or we value that Joe Biden as a representative shouldn't have any take any kind of short or small temporary activities that will be backlashes soon. So their premises or context of having this pandemic controlled by Medicare by this kind of Medicare is not actually suitable. Right now, why we think that Joe Biden wouldn't win by this Medicare for all platforms? Understand, this is not effective. Firstly, the campaign a campaign funded by the private policies for Joe Biden won't be funded further. Why? Why? Because the private funded the medical system or medical facilities is a huge business in US or US America. So this they won't actually funded for someone who the privates are not funded for someone who is actually abolishing their private profits. So this will make Joe Biden weaker in this campaigns further. And secondly, because that's more intuitive and not practical, because you know that the Canada or British system has hold this cost by limiting the doctors or limiting the healthcare workers. So this even in this COVID-19 is not actually acceptable that you have limited doctors or limited health co-workers. And after or aside this whole pandemic system, you understand that there is so much case that non-emergencies are being led to a death because of this Medicare system couldn't actually services for those peoples, because it is limited as it has it needs to trillion and trillion of funds for actually establishing this system. Thirdly, that you understand that why aren't it effective? The old people of US or America, who has been retired from their job, they are the most active voters in the system of US American electoral system. So understand they if you abolish the abolish the insurance system, then they have to pay a lot more than they actually pay right now, and this will make them turn back from Joe Biden, and this is not acceptable. So this is not suitable or beneficial for Joe Biden. So we think it's not effective in any case. And what the culture of taxing, understand that if establishing this kind of burden like Medicare will rise this tax paying, that you have to pay 52% for 10 million, and it's not suitable, and even the tax rise is not acceptable is like for this kind of pandemic of COVID-19. So we understand that culture of taxing of in US won't let you or will support you for this Medicare. And another one, that culture of US people, we understand that US or American peoples are not so healthier. There is 40 or above people they are suffering from obesity. So understand the people of America are some kind of thinking about their own welfare. So the people who are actually healthier and think about the health cost and make their decisions to have a healthier life, so that they don't have to pay for some kind of health bills or medical system. Those people won't pay the taxes for those obese people who don't have any kind of affection to their own health. So this won't make any affection to Joe Biden by this Medicare system. Right now, understand that the whole system of US America, or whole POV of US the peoples in US America, is kind of the democratic in a capitalist way. Socialism you are bringing up here won't be there, because the US already the media of US, the business of US already being run by this capitalism. And this kind of payroll taxing and this kind of when you have intuitive or non-practical decisions like Medicare, which will ensure that 80% of good staff worker of healthcare system won't be paid as much as they deserve. This kind of system or this kind of plan won't make Joe Biden as any winner of this vote. Understand why we are thinking that status quo is better than transparency. Already, Donald Trump has actually waived his positions with this transparency system, because this actually values, or this can actually ensure that you coverage all. That's actually the motto of this Medicare system, which is not practical in any sense. But being in a status quo and being more transparent is valuable, that you have kind of this. So this is important, that you understand that even if you have some kind of flashing and attractive manifest over the people of US America, but this kind of system will lose 150 million private health insurance, and people are not going to even accept it. So in these circumstances, we believe that this kind of Medicare system won't make win Joe Biden, and proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for your speech. Next up, I invite the guys, am I audible? Yeah, cool. I thank the speaker for your speech. Next up, I invite the second speaker on Team Affirmative. Here.
Can I be heard?
Yeah.
Excellent. We told you very clearly at Reese that healthcare in the US, particularly in the midst of COVID, is essentially a universal concern. And that means that it guaranteed a large amount of disengaged voters from the left, as well as middle-class voters who could no longer pay expensive insurance premiums that COVID requested of them. This was an increase of millions of votes that Reese explained and articulated wonderfully that received no response whatsoever. The only counterclaim that we hear is that, this will be seen as hurting the economy. There has been no weighing done whatsoever. I'm going to take this claim down and explain why we've been able to even at the end of first second. The first and really only pushback they tell us is that this will be seen as harming the economy in such a way that means that a lot of people will turn away from voting for Biden, and that significantly hurts Biden's electability. The first thing to note is that, as we told you at first, healthcare is seen as a precursor for maintaining stability within the economy, which is to say that the reason why the economy has been disrupted, the reason why the US stock market has dropped is because of COVID. And people understand that because it's extremely tangible for them. When they have to go out and wear masks, or when there are protests about wearing masks that happen on their street, etc. Which means that people broadly understand that in order to ameliorate the economy, you need to ameliorate healthcare. Which means that this claim falls down already to the extent to which people see this as necessary in helping the economy rather than oppositional to helping the economy. Secondly, I would note that even to the extent to which voters saw this as a huge source, needed a huge amount of funding, I would note that voters are particularly bad at conceptualizing funding, which is to say that although Trump's wall, for example, in 2016 cost billions of dollars, the rhetoric that he used to demonstrate the wonder of that policy won a lot of people over, even at the expense of the cost of that policy itself. Similarly, we tell you that healthcare for all is a pretty wonderful concept for the average person to be able to afford medication and GP appointments without having to cough out significantly large amounts of money, which means that that's likely to pass. But moreover, we tell you that even in the instance in which this requires significant amounts of funding, I would note that they claim that taxes will need to rise, which pushes people back, is completely fictitious. Which is to say that obviously governments can source money through other means other than just raising taxes, i.e. they can issue bonds, i.e. they can take out loans, i.e. they can run on a deficit as the US government has done since the 1960s. The fourth and final response to this is to note that even if this is seen to be hurting the economy, I would note that the vast majority of people will still vote for Biden with a healthcare policy, given that the economy is a less tangible concern to individuals in a country wrecked by COVID than their literal life or their literal capacity to continue to live. Which means that this is devastating for the negative team, insofar as their biggest pushback as to this harms the economy and prevents people from voting for Biden is effectively non-existent in this debate, which means we still maintain proof that more people will vote for Biden than they won't. The second and weaker claim that we hear is that Biden will lose funding from insurance companies in such a way that means that it is really hard for him to win this election. The first thing to note is that Biden is obviously not currently funded by insurance companies. That is ludicrous. That's I guess a source of revenue for the Trump administration, but definitely not for the Democrats. But secondly, even if this were true, and we'll take them at their version of reality, the loss of funding isn't as important because the media attention that you get is positive, which is to say that there isn't a correlation between funding and winning elections, or else Bloomberg would have won a lot more seats than he did in the pre-election. Rather, we tell you that when you push forward a policy that radically mobilizes people from the left wing and radically wins people over in the middle class who can no longer afford insurance premiums, we tell you this is the kind of media attention that the vast majority of the US media institutions, politically wise, will support and get around, and means that Biden gets positive media attention even if he gets less funding to advertise or whatever. Which means that really this negative team has done very little work in explaining why this is going to harm Biden's electability. What did we tell you instead? We told you firstly that this mobilized the left by giving people a policy that was tangible and helpful to them in a way that has not happened since perhaps the Bill Clinton administration. We also told you that middle-class people paid way too much on their insurance premiums now in the wake of COVID, given that insurance companies had a much higher probability of paying out, and therefore they charged higher on their premiums, which means that those people were now much more iffy on the idea of single-payer schemes and were more likely to go for a healthcare system. The third bit of substantive I want to present to you here is that this is uniquely appealing to Black voters by carrying on Obama's legacy, which is to say that Obama had the highest Black turnout historically, and that in 2016 dropped completely. It had the lowest turnout in 20 years. The reason why Biden won a lot of popularity in the early couple of days or early weeks of his election campaign was because he was vice president to Obama. When you carry on healthcare as an extension of Obama's Obamacare, what you do is you continue that underlying narrative, you continue that underlying belief that Biden and Obama are linked inextricably through some sort of ideological connection. That's extremely important in this debate because Black voters responded historically very, very well to that. Black voters, millions of people turned up to vote for Obama, but didn't for Hillary Clinton, and are looking to do so for Biden again. Amplifying that means that we're able to secure that group of people in a way that means that we get a considerable increase in voters for Joe Biden. The reason why this is devastating for this debate is because in swing areas where the African-American vote could determine the way that the election could go, you are now able to win that seat and secure a majority. And in marginal seats, you're able to take a very significant seat, significant win in that area, so as to be able to better pass policy. At the end of this, I guess like this component of the speech, let's make it very clear that it has been proven that Biden is far more electable because he's able to mobilize the left, he's able to mobilize African-American people, is able to win people in the middle class, but he runs in a healthcare policy, all of which were appealed to by this. The final thing that I want to do in the speech is explain a new point of substantive as to why this grants Biden a far easier chance of getting re-elected for a second term, which is to say that the mechanism that we tell you here is that it is very likely that Medicare will pass in the Senate, which is to say, firstly, there is likely to be very large amounts of support from the US population generally, such that there is a Democrat majority or at least a propensity to be able to pass this in the Senate altogether. Secondly, there is generally bipartisan support, or will be generally bipartisan support, given that this is seen as a precursor for economic success, which means that when Biden in his first term is able to put forward a change that radically gives life to millions of people who currently do not have access to the healthcare industry, this reignites flames for the Democrat Party that have been quenched since the Clinton administration. It looks like, for example, disenfranchised voters buying into the Biden leadership more and voting for him in 2024. It looks like people in the left being more mobilized and campaigning more actively, as well as just like there being less dissent between Bernie and Biden and all concentrating around Biden. Incidentally, this is also a way of winning Bernie supporters as which we think is a benefit in and of itself. And thirdly, we would note that this is far harder to attack Biden in 2024 because the narrative used against Obama in 2012 was that he hadn't passed any significant policy in 2008, and that was almost worked to the extent that Romney almost elected. We would say this prevents Biden from being able to be held accountable to the same, argumentative device that had almost undone Obama by giving him something to point out and to say that it's helped the American population. Very proud to propose this motion.
I thank the speaker for the speech. Next up, I invite the second speaker from Team Negative to give the speech. Here.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, but your voice is a little muffled.
Okay, give me a few seconds. I think I have some problem in my earphone.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, but there's still a lot of disturbance in the back, but I think we should work.
Sorry. Am I okay now?
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, if at any point of the debate you can hear me, please give me a text. I'm saying this to my team members.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, try to understand. First of all, the affirmative second speaker comes up and tells us why in this current situation, in the situation of COVID-19, the addressing the Medicare-for-All is going to help. Why this is not true? First of all, try to understand this is a situation, it's a global pandemic, and this is a situation where everything is at stake. You cannot simply discriminate against certain communities in this particular case, because if you actually do not cater to these people, this will actually put everyone at risk. So we believe in this particular case, their argument was quite futile. It reflects the fact that this is a contagious disease, and actually the government have to cater to everyone in this.
Hi, excuse me.
Sorry?
Speaker, I can't hear you at all. I'm really sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. There's a lot of disturbance at the back, like I'm not able to focus on your voice.
Okay, can you hear me now clearly?
I think this is better. Yeah.
Okay, I'll start again, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So first of all, try to understand, they come up and tell us that it's a global pandemic situation, COVID-19. This is more important than ever that people should take to subscribe to Medicare-for-All. Why this is not true? Try to understand, in this particular situation, government is not actually discriminating in any way, because this is a global pandemic, which is a contagious disease. That is to say, the government is particularly actually providing the facilities to prevent the COVID-19 to all sorts of people of all regions, because they have to stop the contamination, they have to stop the spread of the disease. So we do believe the argument of COVID-19 is particularly quite an important thing here. And secondly, they come up and tell us that there are other methods of taxation, other for collecting the money. We believe, first of all, if you collect the money from other methods of taxation, still that would be recovered from the next budget, from the next taxation. And secondly, people don't understand the complications of this economy, the average American people, right? So they will still think that in their mind that this is they're actually cutting off their own money, taking the money from the people. And we believe that's probably I explain to you that later. And FMP speaker also claim that this will create a positive media attention. Right? We don't believe that. First of all, it did not happen in the case of Bernie Sanders. All over the media, the left, from left to right, all criticize Bernie Sanders because of having no practical plans, and because of being against the American sentiment. And secondly, try to understand, this sudden change of policy makes your campaign look weak. And this is very important. Makes people think that you have no plan at all. Makes people think you are actually less confident in your own, and that's why you are changing suddenly. And we believe that's a problem. And finally, I try to understand the black voters in case of Obama voted mostly because of his identity. So we don't believe that had anything to do at all with the policy for the black people particularly. Okay, so try to understand when affirmative side comes up and first tell us the disenfranchised, they nuance a lot about the disenfranchised group, right? First of all, try to understand the Democratic Party already have the minority votes. Why? Because they need Trump to go. They are pissed off by Trump to the utmost level. In the recent cases of George Floyd, you have seen how Trump has vowed against minority rights. So they have an active incentive for Trump to go. That is why we don't believe they would care at all about the Medicare plan. They will vote for Joe Biden eventually. And secondly, we believe that this disenfranchised group will have systematic oppression. This systematic oppression won't go away in the Medicare-for-All. We believe the Medicare-for-All will make the bureaucracy more complicated. And that is to say, in those disenfranchised areas, in those poor areas, in those hoods, we believe those administrative functions will be less functional, will be more corrupted, and that is why we believe the systemic oppression will still remain in their work. And we believe they will lose the flexibility in that systematic complication. Okay, so finally, and I use this extend to my constructive, they try to come up and say, argue with the swing voters. I will show you in my constructive why the swing voters will vote for Biden if he remains as such. Okay, so we had first of primary argument. I will explain to you why Joe Biden has to hold the image of a centrist population in three key aspects. First of all, as many political theories suggest, the centrist politicians have a greater chance of winning when they're competing against a polarizing candidate. Why? Because where do the centrist voters go, right? Try to understand this. The extreme left is already with the Democratic Party. The extreme right is already with the Trump. You have to look for the swing voters, right? So try to understand the swing voters is an average American. Try to win the average American. Try to win with the American value. Or try to win with the practical arguments. And the problem is never in the presidential debates they had come up with any sort of practical policy which is to say they could not convince people why they should actually go to Medicare for all. And try to understand. Secondly, try to understand this is America, right? This is why socialism is seen as a taboo because of the historical clash against USSR and how the media systematically fed into the people, how media constructed this concept that socialism is bad, it is evil. So we believe this idea is going nowhere any soon, right? And we believe that so this historical consensus against socialist policies, against Medicare, is not going to change overnight. And thirdly, we believe when Bernie Sanders has gone, we believe Medicare for all was a major reason why Bernie Sanders could not win the debate. Why? Because first of all, as I have already explained, this is American people did not was convinced. That is why Joe Biden won the Super Tuesday, right? And try to understand the elites which actually endorses the Democratic Party. They actually they are actually capitalists. They are from the drug industries. They are related to the private insurance. They give the money, and also the media. They have never supported these socialist policies because they also cater to the American sentiment of anti-socialism. Okay, so we believe to run the campaign, to continue the campaign, is very important for Joe Biden to actually stick to his policy. And second, I understand why, particularly for America, Medicare for all doesn't work. First of all, they have a culture of not wanting to give more taxes, as I have explained earlier. That it has a relation to the socialist idea. Secondly, American people are in comparison to Europe or in comparison to Australia, American people are way more unhealthy. They are way more cases of obesity. Right. Well, one of my can't you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, we could hear you much better now, but we had problems in between. But I think you can continue. You're at 6:40.
Didn't hear it all.
I'm sorry.
Did you miss anything? Like for how many minutes did you miss?
Yeah, I think I stopped the clock at 6 minutes 40 seconds. The last thing I heard was why Medicare for all doesn't work for USA.
Okay. I'll continue from there.
Yeah.
Get started. So why it does not work for America particularly? First of all, try to understand there is a culture of not wanting to give more taxes, which is actually the which actually has a relation to the socialist idea. Secondly, try to understand the people in America are more unhealthy, more cases of obesity compared to the rest of the world, especially Europe. So these people don't want to take the responsibility of others people's irresponsibility, right? You don't want to money for the problems of other for the irresponsibility of other people. And thirdly, there is no existing administrative structure to function this. There will be needed a large refunctioning, which the capitalists have an incentive not to change the structure, to keep it as such. And try to understand. There will be more latency in the system. It will be more complicated. But our main point is to try to understand totally that there was no practical solution put forward by Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren at the first time. Elizabeth Warren comes up and tells you, always, I have a plan, but she never showed you what that plan was exactly. And the mass people was never convinced. At conservative media capitalized on that. And third, try to understand the voters of Bernie Sanders won't be convinced by only the Medicare for all, because first of all, Bernie Sanders' political image and career made the voters follow him through the political integrity, through the history of political integrity Bernie Sanders had subscribed to. And secondly, try to understand that not all the policies are going to be drastically changed, right? So people are not actually only convinced. Those people who are the voters of Bernie Sanders are not actually going to be convinced only by this Medicare for all. We believe we win the debate because we have shown you how to win the average American. Thank you very much.
I thank the speaker for that speech. Next up, I invite the third speaker on Team Affirmative to give a speech. Here.
Can you hear me? Great, perfect. What COVID has exposed in the American healthcare system is a fundamental failure of insurance companies to meet the needs of every single person in America. It is no longer about responsibility for an individual because responsibility for that is tied to everybody else and tied to the only way that you can receive this ability to get out of this economic crisis. Because in times of crisis, we needed to re-stimulate the economy in a way that was dependent on rebuilding the infrastructure of healthcare that shut people into positions of debt and shut people into positions in which recovery was not possible. I'm going to ask 3 questions in this speech. Firstly, is it practical? Secondly, why we get moderates? And thirdly, why we secure turnout in a way that was incredibly crucial. So firstly, is it practical? Because they say from first that this policy needs a lot of money and therefore it is impractical because it does not happen for economic reasons or because taxes are levied on the American public in a way that is not conducive to American values. There are 3 responses to this. The first is that the government has clearly demonstrated a capacity to deliver these particular types of policies in times of crisis when they're needed. For instance, the release of the universal stimulus package, because it was more important for these American people to keep their jobs and then to be unemployed, or for them to be in situations where they had no liquidity, was something where the government proved that they were able to deliver these cash injections. That is just intuition. But secondly, we were able to levy taxes on the rich who were most insulated from the COVID crisis and the people who were least likely to be in positions of dispensable employment. The third was that there was a particular kind of transition period that you could do, but the important thing was that Joe Biden was able to designate the outcome of this as Medicare for all. It was something that the American government had the ability to do, and it was something that was necessary to do in accordance with all of the scheme of economic recovery that they were able to access. So given that, 2 questions then. Why do we get moderates? Because they say that there will be a significant amount of backlash and this will be socialistic. And note that they do not necessarily segment the way that these voters operate in America, but also they do not explain the scale of this backlash. So the reason why moderates oppose Medicare for all under the status quo is because private insurance has so far insulated them from the effects of health crises and because they are averse to this position of taxes. Why is this uniquely the tipping point for change in this particular context for Joe Biden to need to pivot to Medicare for all? The first reason is because the American public has witnessed the failure of private insurance. There have been refusals of coverage and absolutely exorbitant inflations of premiums that people cannot afford, or coverage is just not given to them, such that they have to pay $3,000 for COVID tests. These exorbitant premiums have been universal. It's not just something that means that poor people are locked out of healthcare. It means that people who are on insurance cannot access the basic healthcare they need because their insurance has failed them. That uniquely was something that universally affected far more of the American public. Secondly, the way up of taxes is now different because they say very simplistically that these people do not want to pay taxes. But the analysis is a bit more nuanced than that, because for the middle class, they may have been averse before because they were insulated from the harms, but the private insurance system has failed them in a way that the cost of that failure and the cost of the hospital costs and the medical costs that they have had to sustain sustained because of the failure of insurance is such that the harms of tax are far, far less. So that way up absolutely changes. But secondly, it is more legitimate for you to tax rich people because they have been most insulated from these harms of COVID in a way that you as the middle class have not. That means that access to stable work has been given to them where you have been unemployed and more dispensable. So it is far, far more legitimate to pass a tax policy that is wide-ranging. But thirdly, it is uniquely a tipping point for systemic reform because as Rees and Deepak both exceptionally explain, this is something that is uniquely widespread and uniquely universal in the scale of the impact of COVID on every single person in the economy. Fourthly, it is a precondition to economic recovery because millions have been indebted as a consequence of that, and millions of people have suffered under this in a way that that debt can only be fixed if the infrastructure of the healthcare is changed in the long term. The consequence of this is twofold. The first consequence is that you gain more moderates because if you weigh up between Joe Biden and Trump's economic recovery plans, Trump is much more likely to play into the economic rhetoric and much more likely to use the language of populism and protectionism. And the benefit of that was Joe Biden uniquely had to stake out a position in Medicare-for-All because healthcare affected these people more directly and affected these people more personally. That was a unique position that advantaged moderates who had been hurt by this crisis and hurt by unemployment and hurt by healthcare costs in a way that was differential from Trump, in a way that played on a separate metric that Trump was not able to claim for himself. But secondly, even if you buy that some moderates still will leave, this means that the group of people is far, far smaller because what we prove with the universality of this impact is that moderates both conceptualize the harms of the current system or are harmed directly themselves by it. So even if some of that flight exists, it is extremely, extremely narrow in the very best reading of their case. But thirdly, why we secure turnout. And this is where we are incredibly, incredibly ahead because there is an incredible lack of response on this front. Because the reason why Joe Biden does not get these voters under the status quo is because the government has actively disincentivized these people from voting in the first place. It has told them that they are disenfranchised, that they do not matter, and has used gerrymandering and voter suppression to make them feel as if they are left out of that system. People have seen Biden as synonymous with the institution that has never benefited these people. People who vote for Bernie Sanders see Biden as someone who is the establishment, who is supported by this funding. So when they say these minorities will vote anyway because they need Trump to go, that was an incredibly flippant response to what was an incredibly systemic issue. At best, this was mitigation, but neither side benefited them under the status quo to an extent that they lost faith in the democratic system. Why was this a tipping point for them? Because finally, this was a policy that restored universal access and not a trickle-down system. And that was uniquely important because trickle-down access was never something that these people bought into and never something where benefits accrued to them. This was something where a benefit directly accrued to minorities as a result of this policy that enabled low SES people and enabled African-American people to access healthcare in a way that they were never able to do before. But secondly, it reduces special interest beliefs. It reduces the belief that Biden is part of the establishment that is sustained by this campaign funding. It reduces the belief that he is tied to the special interests of insurance companies in a way that restores far, far more hope in the democratic system and far, far more trust in these institutions than ever before. Why is turnout then so important? Because disenfranchisement is increasing under the system, because people are disillusioned with the democratic system, because COVID has led to unemployment and the collapse of small businesses that has affected a group that is growing. That is to say, African-American voters do not turn out, but also moderates are shifting toward the left. The Overton window is moving as a result of the way this crisis has made bare and laid very, very clear the effects of the failures of the healthcare system on every single person. So Joe Biden's policies uniquely benefit these people in a way that they were never able to before. And this group was increasingly large. And the failure to get these people to turn out and the failure to get these people to mobilize on the basis that they had lost faith in the ability of the system to provide for them in times of recovery at all was something that was absolutely critical to winning this election. It was critical because these voters were in every single state, because their turnout meant the difference between Joe Biden winning and losing this election. And they did not respond to this sufficiently by just saying that we would get them anyway and be complacent with the system of democracy. We proved to you that during the speech, not only that we get a significant amount of moderates who are affected, but also that we get these people. Their responses of backlash and socialism were just not situated within the context that we existed. We were the only side that was able to secure these benefits for these people.
I thank the speaker for his speech. Next up, I invite the third speaker on Team Negative to give a speech here.
Give me 30 seconds to start my timer, please.
Sure. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. I'm starting in a few seconds. So, if my time is over, please open the mic and say that thing.
Yeah, you can start. You can start.
So 3, 2, 1, start. Understand where this debate leads to? This debate has an underlying clash that people would vote for more for Joe Biden because affirmative side believes that COVID-19 has exposes this Medicare system and whatnot, and moderate people has been divided in a lot of tenses, and Democrats is divided, and because of the Medicare for all system, a lot of people will come and vote for Joe Biden. This claim is very untrue claim, and this claim is very hopeful claim for affirmative sides. We are going to show you why this is not going to happen. Rather, the worst will happen, and less voters will come to vote for Joe Biden. Understand? First of all, they try to say that there is now Afro-American who would get more coverages from Medicare and whatnot. Understand? Medicare for all eliminates Obamacare. That means that gets rid of Obamacare. The second speaker of affirmative team tries to say a lot of people from the Afro-American community voted for Obama because of his identity and whatnot. But understand, when Joe Biden demolishes the Obamacare and tries to place a socialist policy, that means he is getting rid of Obama, and that means he is losing a lot of Afro-Americans voters. Why so? Because a lot of Afro-Americans voters sympathy and vote he had been catered just because he was the vice president of Obama, and he tries to implement an extended version of Obama's policy in the White House. That's why a lot of Afro-Americans has a belief in this. Understand? They tried to say, the second affirmative speaker, they tried to say Hillary Clinton wasn't voted as Obama, but understand, he wasn't voted for Obama just not because he wasn't voted for America, because voted for Hillary because in the election, in the final election, a lot of people and a lot of consensus show that Hillary Clinton will this in this election very easily, and as a result, a lot of Afro-Americans didn't show up to the vote. That is not going to case in the Joe Biden's case. Why not? Two reasons. First of all, in the whole America knows how crooked Donald Trump government is, how problematic his far right supporters are, and how crooked he would be for more than 4 years, for next 4 years. So a lot of democratic people, a lot of minority people would need to save their ass to go to support Joe Biden just because he is opposing him from a Democratic. But more importantly, if they don't show in the voting system, that means easy win for Donald Trump, and that's united a lot of people in the very first place. That's why Joe Biden don't have any form of incentive to get rid of his plan. Why? We believe that get rid of his initial plan would make less voting in the status quo, right? So, like, First of all, when he would get rid of the private insurance, that means 150 million of American will lose private insurance. What that indicate? That indicates that a lot of million of coverages would be lost. Why that's problematic? That's problematic because that tries to say in a COVID-19 situation, this expose the American healthcare system is very faulty, and they can provide most healthcare insurance and healthcare system for most of the American people. Understand, first of all, in this healthcare, in this COVID-19 crisis, don't only exposes healthcare system but also exposes the economic crisis. So when you proposes a bill that will take care for a more than a healthy more than a health insurance, but would take 30 to 40 trillion dollars in next 10 years, that means a lot of taxpayers money are going to cut away. And now in this economic condition crisis, a lot of people would simply oppose to give you that form of taxation money when they don't have enough to feed and going to starve. But more important thing, this COVID-19 exposes is a very temporary thing, right? This will pass away in next 5 to 10 months. But when this COVID-19 will go away, that means 150 million people will lose their private insurance, and significant amount of American people, like 20% amount of American people increases opposition of Medicare for all because the fear of losing it. Why so? Because if there is not proper medical system in their near house, and the government structure has failed to give them proper incentive and proper assurity of their healthcare system, that means without private health insurance and without next one coming in the office, that means their coverages are not covered, and as a result, a lot of people are not going to vote for this Medicare for all. Because if the policy has been enacted and Joe Biden loses next election, that means they are not going to get covered by medical insurance and whatnot. And the fear of losing it enacts a lot of people just to not vote for Joe Biden. But most important thing, my negative second speaker shows you how this is very problematic, because US citizens and US Americans don't want to vote for any socialist responsibility. That's why Bernie Sanders lost in the Super Tuesday, right? Why Joe Biden was elected very first from the Democratic tent. First of all, he's the only participant and only competent in the far right celebration of Donald Trump. Why so? Because Donald Trump policies have a very large supporters who have been consistent among in any form of crisis, right? But more importantly, so Joe Biden needs to tackle this. But more importantly, even if this Medicare for all secures a lot of things, and it's a very good thing in theoretical knowledge, it doesn't implement a lot of US citizens hope. Why so? Because that is just opposing to the what capitalist world says to you. But more importantly, when he proposes this means, that means a lot of lobby group will leave him, and that means understand what's the mechanism of Bernie Sanders fundraising. Bernie Sanders was mostly fundraised by the people of his supporters, but Joe Biden is not that kind of thing. So when lobby group will leave him, that means he has not enough supporting to provide his campaign, to provide his elections and whatnot, and that means a lot loses in the financial securities, and that means consequently less voting will happen in their status quo. But understand, comparatively, what our status quo gives us. Our status quo gives us that Joe Biden believes in a centrist policy. That means he would try to implement this and expand Obamacare. That means Obama has a tremendous support for Biden and tremendous support for his Obamacare and water. That means with the expansion of Obamacare, he tries to give more coverages to the people. That means reaching to the more Afro-American, reaching to the more minority community, reaching to the more vulnerable community, which will be exposed if the private insurance is not being there, right? So with those policies enacted in the place, that means a lot more voter will come. So understand why that will also enact moderate voters in the very first place, because the moderate voters will realize that if they don't vote for Joe Biden, that means Donald Trump will win again. That means they need to vote for Joe Biden from the very first place. But more important thing, this centrist policy is very important, not only for the socialist people, but also from the people who are very disgusted with the Donald Trump sectors, right? So the people who don't want to vote Donald Trump would love to vote Joe Biden just because he is a centrist politician. So that's a very important thing from the very large aspect, because the people who are not going to vote for Donald Trump still have the hope for the Joe Biden, because he is not a socialist and then like a Bernie Sanders, but he is a centrist centrist politicians who is much more rewarded in the context of US community and whatnot. So understand why the system fixation don't give you the mass support, because those fixation support doesn't ensure you better healthcare system and whatnot, because your healthcare system depends upon largely how much doctors you can enable there, and if the government fails to do so, that means your system is not being fixed, and that's been missed largely from the affirmative side. We believe that Joe Biden should stick to his recent policies, and very proud to oppose. Believe that House Negative will take this way. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech. Next up, I invite a member of Team Negative to come and give their reply speech. Here, here. Guys, the reply speech for Team Negative. Hi, can someone from Team Negative reply? Cool. I am on. So, Team Negative.
Yeah, hello.
Oh, okay, cool. Yes, I think you can start the reply speech.
So I'm sorry, really sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. So just keep your eye on the chat box. If your connection gets disconnected somewhere in between,
Yeah,
I'll put a
yes.
text over. Yeah.
Extremely sorry for the
No
inconvenience.
problem.
Okay,
No problem.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Try to understand, first of all, the major reason the government side, the affirmative side gave us was the idea that the COVID-19 has created a new situation, a new context why the American people will be confused over time. Okay, try to understand. Our third speaker came up and told you why this is not the case, why this is a very temporary thing, and try to understand this is something that the American people have been facing all over the time. In the past, they have always faced the situation where they had to pay more, they had to face a difficult situation because of the private insurance or the lack of private insurance, right? So we don't believe this is going to change the system drastically, first of all. And secondly, try to understand why this thing temporarily plays into the mind of the average American. Try to understand this is a sudden global pandemic. So try to understand in this scenario, people are not going to be convinced that this will happen again very soon. Right? People are not going to think this will happen every year. So we believe people have no incentive to think that right now or in this context, the policies have to be changed overnight. And thirdly, as I had told you earlier, that hello.
I don't think you're extremely audible.
Sorry?
During the speech, I'm not able to follow, like keep track. The audio is really bad.
Could you not hear anything?
Am I audible, by the way?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. I think right now it's fine, but when you start speaking, there is some problem, and I'm not able to like keep track.
Okay. I'll start again. Sorry. Okay, starting. So the affirmative side comes up and tells us the major argument they gave was the idea that in this current context, in the context of COVID-19, people are going to face the new challenge that they are going to be convinced that Medicare for all should be implemented because they are being significantly harmed by the situation. As my third speaker had explained to you why, that this is a very temporary thing, right? And why people are not going to be convinced that in future this is going to be happening in every year. So and also try to understand these the complications or the challenges that general people are facing right now. They have faced it all along in the past, right? So there is no like active incentive for the people to think that they now overnight need the Medicare for all to have better healthcare, because they don't believe that Medicare for all works at the first place, right? And try to understand, they have tried to argue about the turnout, how that plays. We have explained to you that there is not going to be any sort of turnout if you heard their idea of representation, if you heard their idea of the American value. So they also try to understand, they have talked about how the moderates and swing voters did not are going to be coming into Biden if he proposed Medicare for all. We have told you that why this is not the case, why they have an active incentive for Trump to go. Why? Because these swing voters, try to understand, these swing voters and these moderates had already vouched for Trump in the previous election in the hope for something new. Because try to understand, Hillary did not offer anything new, but Trump did. That's why they hope some change will happen, their lives will be better. That's why they vouched for Trump, but they were significantly betrayed by Trump. In most of the media interviews, if you see, the general people who actually voted for Trump, who are actually moderates, they always say that it is a wrong decision. Why? Because they thought some sort of change will happen, but nothing happened. The situation worsened. So we believe the sense of betrayal will actually work out for us, and we will have the moderate votes and swing voters if we stick to a plan. And I have in my previous speech told you why the sudden change of plan is actually very, very harmful, right? Try to understand. When you change your plan according to a certain situation, which implies you had no plan at all. You had no plan in the first place, right? And this is going to, why this is going to be problematic. First of all, I told you directly to the mind of the people. We had explained to you how the media plays it out, how the conservative media capitalizes on that and colors Joe Biden. And we've also told you why the funders of the Democratic Party only vouched for Joe Biden, because he had those capitalist interests in his mind. And we believe the Democratic Party is largely dependent on these fundings and on these capitalistic interests. And that's why we believe it's very important to them. And try to understand, we have explained to you why, particularly for America, Medicare actually does not work. Which is quite different from Europe, and we have explained, we have shown you why the sudden change in plan will not be able to convince the Bernie Sanders voters because of his political history, as because of there was actually not a large scale policy change which will occur. And we have also shown you And the affirmative side fails to show you any sort of mechanism to justify how this Medicare for all is going to work for America, whereas we have been claiming from the first that it is not going to work. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for the speech. Next up, I invite the member of Team Affirmative to give the reply speech. Here.
Two questions in this reply. Does Medicare for All win more voters? And would Medicare for All be a success? On voters, we told you there were reasons that always existed from first speaker as to why Medicare for All would be popular. And we showed you that candidates like Bernie Sanders had broadly garnered popularity in supporting that. But really importantly, we told you at first, and they never engaged throughout their case, why COVID had facilitated this unique tipping point that turned Medicare for All into an interesting strategic push from the Democrats into the most overwhelming common sense path to electoral victory. Beyond that, we showed you why it attracted the diverse, huge swaths of voters that the Democratic Party and Joe Biden needed to win the election. We showed you why it attracted a broad spectrum of African-American voters who have historically been more vulnerable in health crises and struggled with access. What did they say in response? They told you simply that Joe Biden already had these voters to try and mitigate the gain. What we told you, Catherine and Deepak, was that this argument was ignorant of the systematic discrimination that isolated huge parts of the Black community from both major parties, because they, number one, either just didn't support Joe Biden to begin with, or number two, they didn't support Joe Biden enough to combat the significant voter suppression and gerrymandering efforts put in place by Republican politicians. And that was material Deepak gave you that was never replied to. What we told you throughout our case was that we changed this calculus for Black voters because we appealed to them directly rather than relying on a trickle-down policy that would somewhat affect them. Catherine gave you really compelling material they never touched as to why this uniquely makes African-American voters more likely to vote for Joe Biden and swing the election in a way that didn't exist otherwise. The second group of people that we got, and before I get to that actually, the other push that we got regarding African-American voters from side negative was that they would lose support because it's Obama erasure. We heard this at third neg. We thought, number one, that was asserted. And number two, insofar as we can't really respond to this new material, the response clearly was in Deepak's material that had a nuanced take on voters as people that can understand policy, how it shifts and evolves, particularly over number one, an 8-year window, number two, particularly during an unprecedented health crisis, and number three, especially when that policy is just so intuitively helpful towards them. So we didn't think that material, as late as it came, really stood regardless. The second group of people that we helped in this debate, and we won that they didn't get, were moderate voters, right? The white middle-class moderates who felt the bite of COVID and were increasingly worried about their health and insurance status if they were to lose their job. What do we hear from side negative? From side negative. We heard that these voters wouldn't support it because they would view it as a random policy backflip. But we had this material in our case from first speaker that we knew that voters understood the urgency of the moment, and to change your policy in wake of literally a global pandemic that ruined economies all around the world was not a policy backflip, but rather an evolution that responded to the moment in time. We thought, again, this policy was far more likely to be backed by moderates because they recognized their change in reality and would support a revisement of Joe Biden's policy that would help them as well. We gave you compelling material at Deepak and Catherine as well about how they shifted the Overton window towards the left in the COVID moment. They never truly engaged with that different reality. So the outcome we got in a debate about a presidential candidate against a dominant incumbent was that it was never acceptable to stand by the status quo they stood by. We showed you why Medicare for All was the key to exclusively unlocking Joe Biden's path to electoral victory by drawing in voters from both sides of the spectrum. We won that point, which is the most important in this debate. But then briefly, would Medicare for All even be a success? Because they told us that 150 million people would lose coverage overnight. Number one, it was rather assertive, but number two, side negative never did the weighing to explain why this outcome was comparatively worse to their status quo, in which lots of people weren't even covered to begin with, and to the extent they were covered, we told you from first speaker why that coverage was so bad, because premiums were getting higher. As we told you at Deepak, people were more likely refused and denied en masse in COVID. So the only comparative that they had was still one that was worse to stand by. We would rather an outcome where more people were protected, which we got under Medicare-for-All. Secondly, and really briefly, they told you it'd be too expensive. We showed you at Catherine in particular why the government had the ability to succeed in immediate expensive policy, how it could tax the rich, and why this would be politically palatable for a lot of people. So because we stood by protecting millions and millions of Americans who without our help would be left to literally die or at best be plunged into financial and economic ruin, we think this debate clearly fell towards side affirmative.